And here we go. All right, so this is week one of our group discussion, secondly week two of the class. I am John Lombardi, and I'll be leading with the topic of dealing with conflict. Hey guys. So I can leave it kind of open-ended in the beginning. Oh, we got a fellow. Roderick?
Our hand.
Roderick, I see you got a microphone there now. Can you say something?
Yes, sir. You
It's not quite clear. Roderick, is there any way that you can type in the private message? Because you're coming in real funky with audio. All right, well, we can keep going. Hopefully he joins. But so yeah, dealing with conflict. Oh, there you are. What's up, man? Roderick?
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Good, how
Are
are
you
you?
able to hear? Hello.
Okay, cool. Got everybody. So yeah, I think one of the first questions I want to ask is just, would anybody feel comfortable sharing a story that they've experienced with conflict over the years? Like, it could be in group, it could be kind of interpersonal conflict with like a friend, any sort of situation where you had to be confrontational and you had to kind of talk with that person. Does anyone want to share something like that?
Conflict.
I have an example. So one of my coworkers just left, and so she's no longer with us. And I made it sound like she died. She didn't die. She's just no longer working for GCU. And so I've had to follow up with a lot of her students, and there's been some problems with them, and it's kind of hard because she's my personal friend. Like, I know her outside of our job, and like it's really been kind of awkward because I can't talk to her about anything that was going on with her students anymore because she doesn't work with us anymore. So I think I'm currently dealing with this, and it'll just be interesting to see how it all plays out because we can't talk about work anymore. And I'm not sure if she quit or got fired. It's kind of a fuzzy gray area. And based on my conversations with our manager, it kind of sounds like she might have gotten fired. And so it's my cat. I don't quite know how to navigate our personal relationship, and then me having to follow up with her issues in the job. So it's just been kind of a weird situation that I'm currently working through right now.
Yeah. So with that, how have you noticed the kind of dynamic in the workplace? Is it tense right now? Are people nervous about things? Are they anxious?
Well, we just found out that she doesn't work for GCU anymore today. We didn't know, and so it's super fresh and super new, and so I'm awkwardly having to kind of clean up her mess, but she's still my friend, and so I don't think anybody else feels like it's tense. But I had a phone call with my manager right before this, and some of her words were not positive about the whole situation, so I think it's kind of awkward and kind of tense right now.
Bummer.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, workplace confrontation is tricky because especially when we're working with our managers, there's I think you have to be a bit more careful with words and maybe feel as though you can't be brutally honest because there's a power balance there, right? Like they're above you on the org chart, and so maybe you just kind of have to listen to what they have to say and not really give any sort of input, or maybe you're afraid to give input. I mean, that's how I would feel in that situation, but yeah, that's tough.
I have a situation I'd like to share if possible.
Sure.
I work with an IPS service. It's an employment support employment service that we provide to mental health and substance use clients. And some of my coworkers are very young, like I'm talking like 20, 27, 28, as opposed to my 40-ish, so we have a supervisor, we have employment specialists, and we have peers who are the people who help with the mental health part of it. So the peers are a little more, they're older and experienced, and I am the oldest ES. The other ESs are like social worker, we have a master social worker and a regular BS QP. And we have team meetings every Monday. And the supervisor was out. See, these young ladies have, one young lady is married to a military man. He's actually a pilot, so he's gone a lot of the time. They don't have children. The other young lady doesn't have children or family. So everyone else in the building have families, children, everything. And this Monday was the beginning of school, so of course our supervisor calls out. She has about 6 children. So first day of school, she calls out. We're at the meeting, and there's a saying called throwing people on the bus. The young ladies were complaining to her supervisor that why is she not at the meeting? If we have to be at the meeting, why does she not have to be at the meeting? And they went, and I was, it didn't, it was them expressing a grievance initially, or concern initially, or what I thought was a concern initially, and I was just quiet about it. But something started welling up inside of me because I felt like they kept going on and on and on, like they were attacking this woman without even understanding or contemplating the fact that, considering the fact that this is the first day of school, and she probably has some things that she needs to deal with her children. And I just felt the need to speak on that behalf, try to share some. I was actually a little heated, actually, because I could imagine, because I have children, and it was the first day of school I have a kindergartner that was her first day today, and I didn't want to be at work either. But I took them to school, and then I came on to work. I could have stayed at home. I should have. I wanted to, but I balanced out and came on to work. So to me, it felt like I could have been this lady that they were throwing under the bus at the moment because she chose to stay and take care of her children or to address her children. And so I basically tried to give messages to them to try to get them to consider and to see that they had a different circumstance than this supervisor, that, they're trying to approach this thing from a equality type stance without looking at the individual circumstance, And I said, this lady has children. She's a mother. She has children. While you, on the other hand, you don't have obligations. So just consider the fact that there may be other things that she has to consider. So why, don't look at her not being here as it relates to you. That you don't have no reason not to be here in that regard.
Right.
Felt like that was a way, that was kind of a conflictual situation where I had to be careful about what I said, but I felt compelled to say something to address the issue because we're supposed to be a team, and I'm about trying to be a team and avoiding the conflict or dealing with conflict effectively and helping us grow as a team.
Gotcha. That was a lot.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's a long day right there. Roderick, what's up, man?
What's up, man? I think I finally got a good connection now.
Outside. You had to go outside. Okay.
Yeah, I had to leave and leave my house and go somewhere else. My connection was bad over there.
Oh, bummer.
Okay.
Well, are you in a place where you can have a 2-hour Zoom meeting?
Yes, sir. I'm here. I'm all free game right now. 2 hours.
Cool. Yeah, we're just going around kind of sharing if anybody had any personal experience with conflict, maybe in the workplace or with like friendships, relationships that they were willing to share. Haley and Hassim both shared a little bit. So it's just kind of like an open-ended question. You can share if you want.
Yeah. I don't deal. I haven't had a lot of dealings with conflict, but I think it all boils down to communication. Um, Even if somebody is not doing what they're supposed to do in the workplace, it's just a way that it's a way that you can approach them and that to where they won't feel threatened or they won't feel, like you trying to, I guess, boss them around. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my biggest deal with. I try to communicate with people on the workplace and do everything I can do to make people feel comfortable.
Okay. Colin. So yeah, speaking of communication, I kind of forgot. I didn't go over the rules and guidelines that we set. So just for continuity purposes, I'm gonna read those real quick just to make sure we all got them. So I'm just gonna read the last post I have is what Hassim posted a week ago, and so the rules we wrote down are these. The expectation is that every member agrees on the weekly time. I know today kind of got moved back a bit, and moving forward we can discuss a more finite time when we can start. And then rule 2 is that everybody is respectful in their interactions and engagement during the group, and that we respect the confidentiality of the members. So obviously what we talk about in this group doesn't go anywhere. Number 3 is that all members are to contribute as equally as possible. So yeah, maybe I'll call on you if you haven't spoken up a little bit. And then the next one is maintaining respect toward other group members should be established at the beginning and enforced throughout the course, including cultural differences, religious differences, etc. Yeah. Sound good to you guys?
Good. Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Cool.
John, before you keep going, I got a notification. I don't know if anybody else did, but
Yeah,
we have unlimited minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have unlimited minutes now.
Good. Great.
Solid. So before I jump into like my main talking points, is there anything that anybody wants to talk about specifically? Like I know I asked that confrontation question as a general kind of introduction, but like, does anybody have any specific goals or things they're hoping to accomplish in like our first meeting?
Yes. Well, for the first meeting, one of my goals is, remember the topic, and I like to explore whether there's any reality to the fact that most conflict can be approached in a similar manner. Like, for example, workplace, personal, or, I'm sure that the differences will be to the extent or the closeness or the intimacy that you have with the person, so they're going to be approached differently. But I'm sure there's, just like in communication, there's some general strategies for dealing with conflict. And I just want to explore a little bit about what the differences are in terms of the relationships. And a little bit more about the stages of groups and see how much we can get to that in this first meeting.
Okay. So when you're talking about like general versus specific strategies, did you have any in mind that we can talk about a little bit later that you were thinking about? Or just want to like talk through them as a group?
Like iMessages, for example.
Okay.
I mean, I understand the efficacy of an iMessage, but I just kind of feel like, well, from my experience, I should say, iMessages are more difficult to use the more pressured you are. So I guess that speaks to the salience of them or the importance of them. The more involved or ingrained you are in the conflict, I think is more important for someone to be able to use iMessages instead of attacking. So, but I just think that I know that I work on my conflict resolution skills. It's personal. It's easier to talk to other people about it and try to skill build with other people about conflict resolution. But when you're dealing with it yourself, it's always more difficult to take your own advice than it is to give. And so I was just thinking that maybe, as I want to hear about other people's experience with iMessages, I guess, in personal and, maybe work relationships as well. But the I like the comparison and contrast between personal stuff and work related or more general stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I'll write that down so we can talk about it in a little bit. Okay, cool. So that's actually a cool segue. One of the things I wanted to bring up, so Roderick mentioned communication, and Wasim, you just talked about communication too. There's this book called Thanks for the Feedback. I recommend it to like anybody at any point. It's super good about really feedback in general, and a lot of it boils down to communication, how to communicate, what to communicate, when to communicate things. And a lot of what this book talks about has to do with conflict and conflict resolution and how to weave your way through a tough topic. And so last night I was trying to pick up some points, and I came across something, and it's 4 skills for managing a conversation. And the 4 it lists out are listening, asserting, what they call process moves, and then problem solving. And so the first one, listening, is really just asking clarifying questions and paraphrasing and acknowledging feelings, right? So I think as therapists, we're very familiar with what it means to be active listening and empathic listening, and even asking clients for clarifying questions. We're asked to like repeat and make sure we understand. So what do you guys think about that for conflict resolution though? Because from my experience, typically when there's conflict, people are emotionally charged. And so what do you think about listening when it comes to like a heated conversation and conflict?
So you're saying like in a group setting where there's 2 people in a heated argument, how would we approach that?
Yeah, like if somebody is upset either in a group setting or maybe just 2 of you one by one, how do you think listening can help resolve some of the conflict?
Well, depending on how heated it is, you automatically want to diffuse the situation by separating the 2 people. Okay. Especially if it's a high-octane emotional group like a Hebrew group or a rape victims advocate group or a substance abuse group. You really want to separate them, or it can get physical.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And Taylor, you were going to say something. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think listening is really important when you're trying to work through a conflict. But I think it can be really difficult, and kind of going off of what was just said, like when you get really heated and you kind of get in that moment, it's really difficult to tune into what the other person is saying, because it can be easy to be consumed by like your own anger or frustration or whatever you might be feeling. So I think although it's one of the most important things, I think it is one of the more difficult concepts of conflict resolution to actually stick to, like when you're in that moment, depending on what exactly the conflict is.
I agree.
Yeah, one of the things the book brings up is that all of us have an inner voice that will come to our defense immediately. And so if somebody is talking to you and giving you negative feedback, it's really hard to listen to them, because you're probably listening to your inner voice who is defending you and creating all these reasons and justifications for why you should be defended.
Wow.
When emotions are involved, that becomes more difficult. So the next one is asserting, and it points out that there's a difference between asserting yourself and asserting the truth. So asserting the self is kind of standing up for yourself and just expressing your feelings and making your opinion known, versus asserting the truth, which is, well, you're wrong, and this is why you're wrong, and here's evidence for why you're wrong. So assertion can be really good because if a person knows how to do this within a group, it can kind of help protect them against feeling diminished and devalued and even attacked. The next one is process moves, and that's being able to recognize when and how to move the conversation into a more productive direction. So, Rochelle, you were talking about like with victim advocate groups, if two people are really angry at each other, even if there's physical violence involved, you have to separate them immediately. So that is a quick and physical way to move the conversation in a different direction, right? But there are other ways, like if in group therapy or a group session, if the conversation is completely off topic and you've done 4 steps, away from the topic of that night, a process move is a way to kind of bring it back home and say, hey, okay, guys, be focused. We're talking about this is the question that was posed, so let's kind of dig back into the last thing it talks about for managing the conversation is problem solving. So kind of taking action steps. Where do we go from here? What do we do now? How do we accomplish that? And so in group therapy, a lot of times people will express their feelings, and some people are more action oriented, and so they want like okay, so now what step? Have you guys thought about or come up with good problem solving action steps?
Ask that question again about problem solving.
When it comes to problem solving, like a lot of people are action oriented and want an action step, and they're asking now what. So when it comes to groups, when people are talking about things and topics are being brought up, have you ever thought about what good action steps are to accomplish those problems?
The first thing that I would say would be to identify the problem.
Okay.
Identify the problem, and then give them a chance to elaborate how they feel about it. How they feel about the whatever you identify as the problem. Yeah. Make sure that that all the people, whether it's in a group setting or whether it's one-on-one, make sure that it's understood that is the problem, and then you can move forward after that.
Okay.
Now, see that is I take both. I like see, this is part of kind of what I was going to also. So the problem solving and the process move kind of thing are kind of they're like non-linear. I put it this way. To some situations, it's good to identify the problem. In other situations, it may not be so good to identify the problem, because like, what if the problem is someone else's understanding and comprehension of a situation or the problem in that way? It's kind of like we look at family therapy. You don't want to identify a person as a problem. So I'm kind of thinking that in terms of problem solving, I kind of looked at one thing I learned about the communication thing and the active listening and all of that is I listen for a lot of people, they just want to be heard. And like one of the groups of counseling, one of the goals of group counseling is to make sure that the people in the group, clients in your group, are heard. They feel like they're heard, that they've been heard. And in any conflict resolution situation, you want to make sure that a person is able to express themselves and be heard, because a lot of times it is people just misunderstanding what the other person is saying or feeling, or what they're motivated by, or whatever the case may be. And so what I've learned is that one of the things that helps me with conflict resolution, especially in my personal life, is I don't try to be right or wrong or identify the problem in that sense, in a sense that it's something, because it's not always easily identifiable. It all depends on the situation. So I like to kind of at least look at a situation for what I can do to avoid whatever the problem is, even if we identify it. Roger, I mean, I agree that a lot of times we have to identify the problem, because you can't work on something unless you identify it. But right. Even that,
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. It depends on the situation. Now it may be a situation to where it's something that's really bothering you when you're dealing with somebody, and you're not gonna get it fixed unless you go directly at them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I agree with what you said. like I've been in drug and alcohol abuse, drug and alcohol group counseling, and I just sat in and listened on some stuff, and like you just said, sometimes they never talk about the actual, alcohol or drug problem.
Right.
They talking about all the other stuff. What led up to it, or what's driving them to get on the drugs or whatever. So I totally agree with what you're saying. It just depends on the situation,
right,
and the people you're dealing with.
Right.
And then to try to kind of play devil's advocate, I think there's middle ground between the two of you too. Like, you were saying, what if the person's a problem, right? You don't really want to identify that. But if we still want to kind of problem solve, one thing I've been taught is in marriage counseling, a lot of times what they suggested is that if a husband and wife are arguing, what they should do is kind of like write the problem down on a sticky and put that on the table and say, hey, that's the problem. And although your attitude and your belief is coming from you, that's the thing that is hurting me or I'm angry at. And so it kind of bridges what both of you two were talking about, where it identifies a specific problem that that person has, but it doesn't really get to their identity and say, hey, you're the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're not pointing the fingers at them, but you're pointing more the blame at the problem. Right.
And isn't that exactly what we do when we present different perspectives to clients, like other ways to look at a situation, other ways to look at the situations that they're dealing with, other options of solving a problem or approaching their problems, the different perspectives on their worldview, so that they can have a different way of maybe approaching a problem to solve without saying that, just giving the person more options or different viewpoints that they didn't have. And a lot of times it's just like getting people to have insight sometimes, because a lot of times it's just our perception or our reaction to a problem, or a situation that creates a problem. Sometimes we have to learn how to accept certain things. It's like I often hear people, well, if this person would change this or this person would change that. And a lot of times, as opposed to seeking change in someone else, we have to seek change in ourselves. Yeah. So, and a lot of the work that I do when I'm problem solving and learning, helping clients manage their problems is about what power they have to do things that they have control over, as opposed to looking for other people to do things or change things.
Yeah. Taylor, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment about what you guys were saying about identifying an actual problem instead of the person as the problem. Mm-hmm. I see that a lot. I work with kids, and we see that a lot, where a kid will be upset and they blame somebody else and they put the blame on that person instead of understanding maybe that what that person said had upset their feelings. So instead of saying like they said something that hurt my feelings, it's, well, they're a jerk, and everything is projected onto the other kid.
Right.
And then kind of moving also to the other part, I think that was mentioned about understanding somebody else's perspective too. It's just a lot of times, especially with the kids that I have, they see things so one-sided and so black and white. And taking that time for each person to explain, I said that mean thing about you because you were making fun of me, and engaging in that conversation so that each of the kids can see each other's perspectives and kind of gain a little bit of empathy in that way, so that they are focusing on the problem and not so much on the fact that they're just mad at each other.
Yeah, like teaching kids empathy, because I don't know at what stage it really starts to develop in adults, if it does. But yeah, teaching them that. And I think in groups, sometimes we'll have to do the same thing because maybe they never learned it as a child, Maybe they really don't know what it means to be empathetic to the person next to them. And they hear something and just don't know what it's like to put themselves in that person's shoes. And they think, well, whatever, let's just move on. Yeah, it's definitely something important to teach people.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back to what you were talking about from the book you shared, John, which is like listening, and that if people actually were able to slow down and stop thinking about the conflict and to listen to what the person's saying. A lot of issues could be resolved really simply that way. But we get caught up in the emotions of it, how maybe somebody's words made us feel or their actions made us feel, instead of, getting back to, what is the actual problem, like you were saying, Taylor.
Excellent.
All right, so I looked forward to see like what our class had to say about dealing with conflict, and there were a couple links to different things, stuff I wrote down. And so one of the things is about shame when it comes to group therapy. And the quote I wrote down is that being in a group acutely arouses the experience of shame while also creating opportunities to squash it. Right? Being in a group means that you have to be vulnerable with the people around you. That's one of the reasons why trust is so important. And although the confidentiality cannot be guaranteed like it can with an individual client and a therapist, understanding that there is trust within a group plays a vital role. Because if I can't trust that what I'm going to talk about stays in the group, then I might not ever open up about anything.
Right.
Even when I do open up, and I can trust that what's going to stay said there stays in there, there's still this feeling that somebody might reject what I'm saying, or I feel rejected, and there's just, like I said, this acute experience with shame that we will shut down, or we will feel maybe less worthy than what we did walking in. If we're in group counseling, there is something that we're there to hopefully find help with, and so if we feel shame about it, oh man, that's just going to like derail all the work that's been done leading up to that, or the work that's been done in the group. Yeah. So what do you guys think about that?
I certainly think that shame is an incredible barrier to overcome, especially for, even for the group leader to advocate and create that safe space. The best thing that we can do is try to create that safe space, and I think confidentiality goes a long way to establishing, releasing some anxieties for a client. But then you have the issue of intimacy proximity. I mean, I think people have more shame, and they're less likely to talk with people who know them. It's the shame level increases with the closeness that you have to a person, because you're more vulnerable to the person that knows you. So a group does offer some anonymity to the extent that these are not people that's connected to you already. And so I think group leaders could kind of point on that. If he has established a safe place, I think over time, like in course around just prior to the middle stages of the group, I think, those type of discussions or promptings can take place in terms of pointing out those dynamics in the sense that, how to best take advantage of the group, or how to best seek, get help with your problems by relating to the people with similarities in terms of your experience, as opposed to the intimacy in terms of closeness and proximity. So I think that may help litigate some of the shame, I think, but ultimately it's just a difficult barrier to overcome, I think.
Yeah.
Right. And I think building trust is huge. And I know you mentioned I know you mentioned that it's sometimes harder, like when you know somebody and you're close to them, you don't really want to open up to them. Mm-hmm. But I've also seen instances where those are the only people that people open up to, is people they trust and they've been knowing all their lives. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like you said, it is a tough barrier. You know what I'm saying? You just have to, even in a group setting, you have to do whatever you can to build as much trust as possible.
Yeah, so it sounds like we've heard kind of both ends of that spectrum, right? Like, if I know somebody and I share something with them, I'm going to see them often, so they're going to know that thing about me. And that intimacy proximity makes me feel as though, well, I can tell them because I don't want to be reminded of that. Right. At the same time, maybe it's because of that intimacy proximity that I feel like I can trust them, because like they've proven that I can trust them over time. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Yeah, and I definitely know that anonymity aspect. There's like an old adage that it's easy to talk to counselors because you don't know who they are, and the idea of like people spill their guts to bartenders because they're gonna
Yes,
drink a little bit and it's a stranger that they don't know and they're never gonna see him again, so they can just tell him
right.
everything. Yeah.
Well, I'm a barber and people tell me everything.
Definitely.
And then there's also an interesting aspect of it too, where like I think the best way to explain this is an example. Like I think when in one of our classes previously, we all had to go to some sort of group meeting. Did you guys have to do that?
The the 12 program thing.
Yeah. So I went and I sat in on an AA meeting, and it was interesting because all these people came from so many different walks of life and knew things about each other, and so it's almost like they had then created their own kind of circle of trust where like they were friends outside of the meeting, but they only had that trust because they went to the meeting. Am I making sense? So I
Yes.
thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic about like shame, and that like they may have felt it when they got there, but now they have these like people that they trust within their group and are able to share more because maybe they have somebody in the room that they know and that they know really well.
Beautiful. It's like that dynamic of the struggle. Like you see it with military people as well. Military people have that same dynamic because they've been through a particular type struggle or trauma or something together. And so it creates a kind of bond with them.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that too with the kids I work with. I generally have kind of the same group of kids every time I go, and they have very unique relationships with each other to where they're friends outside of our program. And a lot of times, if they don't feel comfortable sharing something with me, they'll share it with their friend instead. So they definitely like have that trust, that open communication. But then, like you guys were saying at the same time, I've definitely seen the shame aspect come into play where I've had to, watch the nonverbals and see when somebody was upset or when somebody was hurt because, they shared something intimate in the group, had started to shame them, make fun of them, kind of took it as a joke, and had to push their conversation away so that it didn't turn into an argument or a fight of, like I shared this really intimate thing with you and now you're making fun of me for it.
Right.
Yeah, so shared experience can be super big about, how do I word this? About creating trust and establishing like a strong link between people. For sure. Rochelle, what do you think?
I just got back. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Talking about how shame in groups can have a lot of detrimental effects. So the idea of sometimes it's easy for people to open up because they feel, at least at the beginning of a group, these people are strangers, and so I'm not going to feel judged by them. I'm probably not going to see them, for a long period of my life. But and then the other aspect where it's easy for some people to open up to only people they know really well because if they trust them, trust is established.
I think shame has to do with if they're an introvert or they're an extrovert. Introverts are going to feel shame with anybody. They're not going to want to open up to anybody or talk to anybody unless they're a social person, as opposed to an extrovert who probably feels more comfortable opening up to everybody. And it's not a big part. It also just depends on a lot of personality, different shame and how they feel about themselves. The same issue. The big question. Not a variable.
Sweet. So have you guys come across any sort of exercises that help group therapy resolving the feelings of shame? Is there any books that you've read or articles you've read or even exercises that you've come across that help build, I don't know what the exact antonym for shame is. Yeah, have you guys come across something like that?
Well, working with adolescents, adolescents, every group population you have to approach differently because of the developmental stages, the maturity stages, cognitively, and all of that. So the work I've done with adolescents, like day treatment setting, I have learned that you can do a lot of trust exercises because there's going to be, and then you have those intra-group situations when you're having a group. And so you want to diminish the intra-group clicks or links and try to create overall group thing for just the purpose of the group. So some of the things we would do, outside of icebreakers, to warm the children up, the youth up, is we would do a trust exercise. I'm sure you guys work with youth, this is a famous one where you get the children to, and this could be done with adults as well, but it's easier or more fun, I think, to do with adolescents. Where you fall back on, you have to trust the person to catch you. You have to trust the person behind you to catch
Trust fall?
Yes. So I've had some success with that, but it's, again, you have to be very careful about, if there's some serious traumas or something like that, you got to be careful about that. In the screening, you address all of those issues. But for the most part, when you establish a group, the interventions and stuff that you use and activities that you use, you want to vet those and make sure that they're appropriate for the group too. But we tried those things. And also there's another one where there's a nonverbal communication. You want to teach nonverbal communication skills, right? So you get the children to line up by age, by age without saying a word. So I've had like 25 students, children, and they had to do this exercise. So without speaking a word. And, the idea is just to show them that they can accomplish this thing that seems impossible to do without talking, to introduce to them one thing, a different way of communicating, or the fact that you can communicate in various different ways. And then that helps start building ways to work with other human beings that you don't know to get an objective done. So it's all little exercise that you work up to building to the trust thing, and then you can kind of start approaching the shame thing, I think. But I don't know anything specifically that you can do to address shame in that regard, I think, outside of just sharing and seeing what other people are going through.
Yeah. Okay.
I did read an article sometime this week, I think, about them having if they're having a problem with what they're doing, you put it on a different person, like a story using characters, and then ask that person, well, what do you think they're feeling right now? Or how do you look at it? Just disembody them out of their situation and put them onto somebody else. I read that. I don't remember what article it was, though.
So kind of like creating a character that embodies the things that you're feeling and like playing that character out in a story. Okay. That's awesome.
It is.
Almost like, I don't want to over spiritualize, but it almost sounds like a parable. Like, hey, here's the story of this thing happening. Where, there's not necessarily a faith aspect to it, but hey, here's an example of the story to teach this lesson. And in this instance, it would be shame. Song. All right, so the next one I read was about preoccupied group members and kind of how to handle that type of group member. And so some of the notes I took is that preoccupied members might always fish for affirmation due to a fear of not having others' comparison and support, fear of not having others' compassion and support. Okay. Like a preoccupied member seems to be adept at mirroring what other members do and making them feel special and validated, and to challenge that person would risk their place on the pedestal on which the preoccupied member has placed them. So let me try to break that down. That was a quote I pulled. The preoccupied member is really, really good. I wrote down that they seem like they might be a good salesman, because they're very good at telling other group members what they think they want to hear. and kind of bolstering them up. And a preoccupied member does that because they want to fish for compliments and fish for affirmation because they feel like they didn't get enough of it growing up, whether they're aware of that consciously or subconsciously. And so how to deal with that preoccupied group member is one of the things this article talked about. Something I wrote down is that group leaders must challenge and confront this so that the image of this preoccupied member is no longer enforced by like the best person in the room, and that they always have the nice things to say, and that there's nothing ever wrong with them. What do you guys think about that?
I've had some experience with that, those type of people in in substance abuse groups and in youth groups. And so, like in the youth group, it was kind of like this person had all the right answers always, and or always minimizing interventions. So I kind of they kind of mirrored each other, I think, in that way. But in the substance abuse, when you're dealing with an adult that's doing that, you definitely have to challenge that because it's clear disingenuousness and not, and you know that you realize right away that that's stunning the group movement, progress, and the process. But for the youth, it could be a little more difficult to deal with because the other extreme of that, I think, is a person who always is triggered by the discussion or an intervention. Problem I have with youth is that they're always, and that's kind of going to something else though, but I think it's kind of similar, but I'll stop there because I think I'm going to something else now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And something too is like with any group member that's like their attention is not obviously with the group, is like their comments may not be moving towards any sort of resolution. If like the group is trying to work towards something in particular, like if all the people in the group are feeling anger about some sort of situation, for example, and there's somebody that's really preoccupied, their comments and their contributions to the group may not be moving towards resolution to that anger. They could honestly just be like feeling other people because they're not really paying attention to other people's feelings and how the conversation may be going. And I'm going to circle back, and it goes back to the first thing we've been talking about is just that whole like listening and empathetic listening to people is one way to really minimize the kind of conflict that you can have in a group in really any situation. And I think as we continue these conversations about conflict, and that's something that we are going to probably be tying back to over and over and over again, because listening to someone's feelings is probably the best way to minimize any sort of disagreements and conflict that people do have.
Right. Great.
What else?
So we can go to another thing now. You want more on that?
I was gonna say I'm like I've worked with high schools for years, and I'm perfectly comfortable with silence and kind of just let everybody think about things, because after a while, people speak up. But yeah, we can drill down to that a little bit more. We can move on to the next one. Yeah, one of the things
I actually had a question. I wanted to know how everybody felt. Like if you had like a conflict within a group and you're the leader, how would you what ways would y'all reverse some of those feelings amongst everybody that's in the group? Like how would you start in trying to dismiss some of that conflict?
For me, I think it kind of depends on what the conflict is, how quickly it can be addressed, and how serious it is. Maybe maybe one person constantly interrupts when other people are talking. Maybe one person said something that like really shamed one person that was talking. Maybe somebody's just rude. Maybe they just never show up. Like Katie was talking about, maybe they just never listen. You know, they think they're adding something to the conversation, but they never actually listen to what's being said. They just kind of interject. It could be that there's a cultural ignorance and somebody said something without realizing that it culturally offended the other person in the room, or
Right.
was it just ignorance? I think it really depends on what the conflict is that came up. Because each thing kind of takes a different approach in order to solve it. Was there one you were thinking about, or are you just like generally speaking?
Well, I was just generally speaking, because I know sometimes I've seen a lot of counselors, they kind of like change the subject, but whoever's speaking, you rubbing them the wrong way if you change the subject. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I think like as group counselors, you know, if that's something that we do as a profession, we got to get real comfortable with the uncomfortable. Because you know, if conflict comes up and you just avoid it, well, not only are you kind of subconsciously or enabling that behavior to continue, you're also not addressing the feelings that somebody had where they may feel real bad about the conflict that came up. And in my personal opinion, you know, obviously anecdotally, like unaddressed conflict just festers and stews and eats away at people. You know, like a philosophy I've always had is that you can't get rid of the elephant in the room if you never recognize that it's there, you know, and even more so, you gotta decide like what kind of cost it has, how big is it, how big is the fear? Is it you really want to address the conflict? You gotta lean in, but some people are very uncomfortable with that. And so I think when it comes to counselors, we have to learn how to become comfortable with that.
Definitely. And I think that one thing to remember as well is part of that getting comfortable with is also an element of courage, because for one thing, the group leader has to realize that he or she has to maintain control of the group. While you're facilitating a group that is theirs, that is the members group, it is their group, but you have to be in control of it. And so you have to make, because you're maintaining the safety of the members in that group. And that means from everything, the rules that you establish at the beginning. So if a violation takes place that violates the rules, the ground rules that were laid down, you just remind people that's the beginning. There's initial stages and secondary and tertiary stages of dealing with it, depending on the severity or the, you know, the degree to which someone could be harmed in that situation. So you address it with different immediacy depending on the severity, I guess. So, and there's a lot of skill involved in managing different people and their different emotional things. You got to have the courage to do that and let people know or exude the fact that you have control of the group in a sense that's not offensive to other people and all that. It's a lot of stuff you got to balance. And, you know, usually you start off with butterflies, you know, you start off with butterflies, but you get more accustomed and get used to dealing with those things. And it's not like just having a conversation like we're having. Mm-hmm. You know, you realize we're kind of in a stable situation, right? Our interaction is kind of stable unless there's something, you know, unless we're all going to be surprised. But in a lot of groups that we facilitate, you know, you go into it understanding, you vet as best you can and you screen as best you can, but you're dealing with things that you actually don't have control over their emotions, but you have to maintain control of that process. Kind of. So there's no particular methodology, I guess, or formula. It depends on your personality, you know, and all those you know, those skills that we have when we're communicating and interacting with each other that we use to manage the group and the people.
That's a good point, because with dealing with a big group like that, you can get a mob mentality going. If you don't maintain respect within the group, they'll just snowball off of each other.
Indeed.
Good point.
I've had it happen a couple of times with my adolescents.
I bet.
Yeah. That's what I was going to mention earlier about I had this particular client who used to try to disrupt the groups. And so the tactic that was used is being triggered. Like when we talk about something, we're in the group to discuss issues and problems and solve problems. But her thing was, his or her thing, because they switched up sometimes, that triggered me. And so being triggered is supposed to create a situation for them where they can't move forward or whatever the case may be. And you have to learn I developed some skill in trying to do psychoeducation to use the triggering event as the event to address the situation. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Because, most of the times the person that's doing that has their intention is to disrupt the group, so they have to be removed. That's just an example that I wanted to bring up before, but it was premature.
Yeah. So that brings up a good question too. Like, at what point does conflict resolution kind of seem out of reach, and then removal becomes what we have to do, right? Like, where is that threshold for us? Like, ethically, legally, and then kind of personally. Where do you think that?
I think that.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think that if we're going to use Hasim's example, if there's a client in a group that is constantly being disruptive and really isn't providing any positivity in a group, I think that, conflict resolution is obviously the first step in it and working towards some sort of solution for that client. But if they ever get to a point where they're harming another person or being like intentionally, for lack of a better word, mean to somebody, that removal might have to be the only solution, because the point of a group is honestly positivity in the long run. And if a client is consistently going in the opposite direction, I think that they're not providing any sort of positivity for A, themselves, or B, the rest of the group. And so I don't think that they could be productive in any way while they are there. And I think that at that point, removal is honestly probably the only way that it would go over positive for the rest of the group. I don't know if that made sense.
Mm-hmm. It did. It made perfect sense.
I think similar to that too, it kind of goes back to making sure that we work through conflict when it comes up, so that we hopefully don't get to a point where a person would have to be removed. Hopefully throughout the course of the group, they would be able to learn and improve how they react and interact with people, so that they wouldn't have to be removed. But if for some reason, those interventions and like the group process itself isn't working, something else would have to be done.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say all of us realize that there is a point at which removal is necessary. Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're just about at an hour. Not that you guys need permission, but like if anybody has to go to the bathroom, or if you guys want to take like a 5-minute break or something, or if you just want to power through, it's up to you. But yeah, do you guys want to keep going? You want to take a little breather?
I think take a little breather. And I'll be back.
I can't hear you.
I want to take a little breather, and I'll be back.
All right. You guys want to keep going? Well, Hasim, take like a little 5-minute break, but is that cool with everybody else?
I'll take a little 5-minute break. That's fine.
Okay. So at 5:50, I guess it'll be Rochelle 7:50 your time.
7:50.
Okay. Cool. I'll just let it keep recording.
Okay.
3-minute counseling session, so I probably won't be done till about 9:30. We got to record it. So yeah, we got a little 5-minute break. So I'll probably be half asleep when I get through. I think somebody stole my phone. I might have left it in the car or something. Somebody might have stole it yesterday. I had to give my phone. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Last in the house. I went to Wendy's last night. I 40 something. Yeah, I might have to come along. Let me mute this thing. I might have to tomorrow, business tomorrow. So I might have to just try to come over there like a do a little day or something. My whole morning, my whole day was messed up. Woke up this morning, my car wouldn't start for one thing this morning. I had to I gotta get a new battery. What you mean what I was doing? Man, shit. Man, that was another day. My whole day was messed up. Shit, now I ain't making it on time. Shit, I had to get a only person I could think of.
Welcome back. All right, cool. So the next member that I read about is called dismissing or avoidant members, and they're kind of the opposite to the preoccupied members. One thing I forgot to mention is that preoccupied members will actually enjoy sitting close to people because if they're getting affirmation from others, they'll kind of want to sit close to them, whereas dismissing avoidant members will often sit far away from people, actually won't speak up often and are really almost against expressing emotions to sort of vulnerability. And so while I wouldn't say that they are a challenging group member, we as leaders might have to challenge them more than they are comfortable with in order for them to even participate in the group. And then one thing I wrote down is that they are more likely to use implicit, nonverbal cues to express experiences and feelings. So, Rochelle, I think you were saying earlier, extroverts will typically, talk more often, grow in the conversation, whereas an introvert will be a bit more reserved, not speak up so often. So running along with that theme, dismissing avoidant members may be in the same boat. Like they don't verbally communicate how they're feeling oftentimes, but they may have nonverbal cues like looking down at the ground, maybe clenching their fists to express that they're angry instead of actually saying I'm angry or frustrated, gritting their teeth. A lot more nonverbal cues than verbal cues. So when it comes to that, what ways do you guys think that we can gently challenge them and kind of show them that they can trust the group in expressing their feelings?
I think part of it is trusting the group and also being able to trust the group leader. I have a client, he's a teenager, and he is not one to really share his feelings. He thinks that sharing feelings is a sign of weakness as it gives other people power, because it allows them to understand him, and he is very nonverbal. So it's really important for me when I work with him to understand those nonverbal that he has, and it's taken me a long time and a lot of rapport building to even be able to get to a point where when I ask him, hey, how are you feeling? For him to give me an answer, because before he would just kind of sit there and ignore me for it could be 5-10 minutes, like I was never even there. So I think if that kind of member had a really good therapeutic relationship with the group counselor, it could probably help nudge that along, to where they could feel comfortable sharing in a group because they have that trust and support of the leader.
Taylor, I think you touched on something really important for this kind of group member.
Hey, Hasim.
Yes.
If you're not talking, would you mind muting your Zoom? There's a lot of feedback coming through, I think, and it's hard to remember.
All right. Let's see here.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Haley.
Taylor, you touched on an important aspect, which is I think for these people, it's time in the group, because if a person is slow to trust and you can recognize that at the beginning of a group, then anything you say to them honestly probably won't make a difference. And so the more time that you spend with them and the more ways that you can show them that they're the other people in the group's information is being held confidential, and that nobody's going to, like you said, Taylor, use it against them as a way of power, that slowly they might come around. I think that there's not a whole lot of ways that you can really draw somebody out if they're honestly really closed off. Obviously, they want to be in your group or else they wouldn't be showing up. So you have that going for you, but I think that over time is the best solution for those kinds of group members. And hopefully they don't disrupt because they aren't participating. But I think that there's only so much you can do for group members like that.
And so, Haley, you made me think of you brought up a good point. What do we think about doing that with volunteer versus required groups? Like maybe somebody is required to get into a group. How would we go about the same process if they are just stubborn and don't want to be involved in any certain way? Do we think trust would have the same effect in that person? Or do we think that there's another way to kind of get them to open up and share and be interactive with the group?
So I attend a lot of mandatory debriefings because I'm in law enforcement. So you have firefighters, law enforcement that are mandated to go to these huge debriefings, and none of them want to talk, definitely not about their feelings, especially the military guys. And they get a lot more out of just being there and hearing other people. So maybe much less like forcing them to talk, just letting them sit there, you know, because I know that a lot of the guys are more traumatized from being forced to talk during the group on our mandatory debriefings than they would be just sitting there absorbing what everybody else was feeling or doing a private one-on-one, which we've had to do sometimes.
So I'd like to add that part of addressing that issue takes place during the screening process. And for example, and also addressing multicultural issues as well, because I see that with a lot of like African Americans, for example, they have socialized reluctance to, you know, uh, engage in the counseling in terms of sharing their feelings or they feel like they're taking their problems outside of the home and all that. I was even raised that way. So sometimes, like, if a person feels like that there's no one in the group that they feel, because sometimes you have people that sit in the group and they feel like, well, no one in here can understand me. No one can understand my problems. No one here has the same issues that I have. So part of the effectiveness of a group is having people that can relate to each other's experiences and stuff like that. Like, you can have a group where there's adolescents there, and some of them are involved with gangs, and they have this code and all this other stuff. And so you can get perhaps maybe have a person who is more who went through the same experience, and they're now at a place now where they're trying to engage in the action part of changing their lives or optimizing their lives, and you get positive outcomes. So you can have someone who's already been through that process in and show them so that they can see that there's a person that has walked their shoes, but they're at this point at this time now, and you can also arrive there. So sometimes just trying to have a counterpart to that type of person in your group can help sometimes as well.
Yeah, and if anything, they can take away and make friends during those kind of situations and talk on their own, you know, and be able to talk it out, even if it's not in the group setting. It's giving them peer support.
I think it could be important too, even if somebody doesn't like sharing, just to offer the opportunity to share and express, you know, like, I do care about the things that you have to say, and even if you don't want to tell me, like, that's fine. And then that way, hopefully they feel, you know, like, wanted in the group, cared for in the group, and it gives them the opportunity. But it also shows them, like, it helps them maybe feel more comfortable, because like you said, if they really don't want to share and they don't like to share and it's more harmful than helpful, then it still respects that boundary as well.
I totally agree with you, Taylor. That's a good way to build trust. You know, over time they may begin to open up after they do what you just said. You know what I'm saying? They may, over time, they may say, well, Taylor is a caring person, so I may, you know, decide to open up to her about some stuff later on.
Solid. All right, so the last member I want to talk about is the fearful avoidant member, and then Hasim, we can go to that point you made in the very beginning and the question you had about where did I write this down? Oh yeah, if most conflict can be approached in a similar manner. Yeah. Okay. So the last one is the dismissing avoidant members. So one of the things I talk about with the preoccupied member is that they're very good at saying what they think the other members want to hear. And the dismissing avoidant member is even better at this. They're even kind of a social chameleon. And they will oscillate between high anxiety and high avoidance of the group and their emotions. And that may actually be what the research has shown, is that this may be in fact due to a lot of childhood trauma. which brings up a good point. You know, when members are in a group, can we figure out a way, not figure out a way, but is there a way for us to identify what trauma that they've been in without them volunteering that information? You know, like how do we gently and respectfully ask them to share something like that, especially if they're not comfortable with it? Yeah. What do you guys think? Is there a way to do that in a group, or do we kind of always back off and let that be 100% in their court? And if they want to share something like that, they can when it comes to trauma.
I think something that could be done, I don't know how well you could orchestrate this, but if there was another member of the group that experienced similar trauma and was willing to share about that, it might encourage the other person that is avoiding the conversation and dismissing it to even share a little bit about their story. Because I think in terms of anybody, if you feel like you're the only person that's ever experienced anything ever, you're less likely to tell somebody else about it. But if you know that somebody else is understanding how you're feeling and can validate the way that you're feeling, then you might be more inclined to actually go about sharing with somebody else. But you'd have to find like two perfect examples of, you know, somebody experiencing the exact same trauma, and the odds of them both being in your group are relatively low. So that's in a perfect world. But yeah, I think that, I mean, even some sort of similar trauma could benefit a client.
Yeah, and Hasim has brought up pre-screening a bunch. I think that pre-screening would help kind of group together. I think the word I learned about this week was homogeneous versus heterogeneous groups. Like homogeneous typically have the same sort of general idea or topic or struggle that they're working through. Heterogeneous is a bit more open-ended in terms of what they're working through as a group. It can be a bit more eclectic. And so, yeah, having one of those groups that you've pre-screened and then who are getting together under the same premise would definitely help that. Yeah. What else?
What you had mentioned was similar to what I was going to say. I think it also depends on what kind of group you have. If you have a group of people who are coming in for a specific reason, and I'm trying to think of like a group that would be a good example, but if it is likely that most of them have had trauma in their past, I think it could be more appropriate to bring that up because it helps the goal of the group and helps them work through some of their problems. But if it was more of like an educational group, then I think it would probably be more inappropriate to ask about trauma. You know what I mean? Like, I think it depends on the group, what they're there for. It could also depend on the age too. It might be more or less inappropriate to ask children versus adults about their trauma. So I think taking the population into consideration is really important too.
Yeah, one of the things for fearful avoidant members is that they, according to the research, will cling to people who are much more secure because that secure person can help to regulate their emotions. And so that's something I think that we should watch out for is, you know, obviously when people form bonds within a group, it isn't bad, but we have to, I think, be careful for what type of bond they are forming and like where that bond stemmed from. You know, if it is from something like a secure member versus a fearful avoidant member, is that beneficial for them individually and as the group as a whole? You know, and if romantic relationships ever happen within the group, things like that, like what brought these members together? What is the kind of premise of their relationship within the group? Yeah. How do you guys think that we could address that topic either within the group or addressing members within the group after the group has ended about things like that? Asim, I think you're muted.
I actually have a really good example of that. I was working at a mental health clinic, and there was a female that was in recovery, completely recovered. She got her kids back, and she had to do a mandatory substance abuse group. And a male went in there who is still addicted, and he was faking his UAs. And it's a year or two now later, and she's back on meth, lost all her children again, and she's with that guy and had a baby with him. So I think it is super important that as counselors and groups, if we see romantic relationships like that, or toxic friendships forming, that we should immediately address it in private. Maybe as like a group, go over the rules again of what the group rules are again when we start it, and then do private like sessions with them that the group doesn't know about.
Hasim, I think you're still muted, man.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay. That was an excellent contribution. That's what kind of on the lines of what I was going to contribute, but establishing that as a ground rule, and it's going to depend on the group, the type of group that you're holding. That's going to make that more important than other situations. So, but you definitely point those dangers or that risk out at the beginning, and redress it as needed as you see those situations.
I think something.
You can
Go ahead, Tim. Oh, okay. I think along these lines, if something that could be really beneficial is reiterating the rules at the beginning of every group session, because you never know who wasn't listening the previous one. And so if we're constantly reminding our clients, like, hey, this is what we're expecting of you, and this is what we're expecting of you, how you interact with the other people in this group, we might have better success in avoiding examples like Rochelle told us about. So state the rules.
Yeah, and with the work that I do, we have a lot of teenage clients that want to be in relationships with other people, and we obviously, there's no set rule that says they can't, but it is something that we bring up when they express having a crush on somebody else or wanting to ask them out, asking them how are you going to feel coming to group every week if you break up? How are you going to feel if you see them talking to somebody else? Reminding them that it can be a difficult relationship. And especially with my kids, a lot of them have past trauma, or they have their own self-esteem issues and their personal issues that they're working through. And that can make being in a relationship very difficult. And it is kind of hard because, we can remind them of rules, we can set, kind of expectations. And in the end, if they want to decide to do it secretly, they still can, which has also happened. So I think it's really important to kind of go over maybe the consequences of having a relationship in the group that's real life to them that they can understand. So kind of to help inform their decision maybe.
Yes, and I work at a mental health facility, and I deal with a lot of teenagers, and sometimes if I get somebody that won't open up, I would, sometimes I would share some personal experiences and, some things that I've been through, and tell them how I overcame some things. And sometimes it worked like that to where it got them more comfortable, and it made them feel like they really was close to me. They was a step closer to me. So sometimes that'll help. I'm not saying it'll help with everybody, but just letting them know that you're a real person and you there for them and feel and be caring to them all the time. And sometimes that helps, what I'm saying, sharing personal experiences.
Yeah, vulnerability was one of the things that we read about in chapter 1 about what makes a group leader, a good group leader. I remember that I used to lead a high school Bible study, and one of the things I shared about on my first night there was my interactions with drugs as a high schooler. And to this day, one of the students I was working with, who's now actually in his last year of college, says that he'll always remember that because it took him back. He wasn't used to people being that vulnerable and that authentic right off the bat. And it kind of gave him permission to then be that same way. And I think as group leaders, if we know how to be authentic and vulnerable, it also gives our group members permission to do the same to an extent. You know, like I don't think that they will need to know every detail from top to bottom, because then it sounds like we are just talking about ourselves. But absolutely sharing with them about this experience that they then can go, oh, wow, like this person isn't afraid to open up to me. I wonder then if this is a place where I can trust the group members and my leader and then open up myself. All right, so the last thing we can talk about before just kind of open it up is, Hasim, that point you brought up in the very beginning. So the idea that most conflict can be approached in a similar manner. And you brought up, I hope it's okay that I call it digital communication. You use iMessage a lot. And I feel like that's maybe what you were hitting at. You know, the idea of addressing conflict through digital communication maybe versus personally interacting with the individuals. You know, how, I don't know, but I don't want to speak for you. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
No, the iMessage is in like it's a assertive communication technique where it's like that goes to the point of not identifying the person as a problem. Instead, you present an I message to the person that says, I feel like this when you do this. So it makes me feel this way, which is why like that strategy was seen to work best with someone who cares about how you feel, but I do find that it's effective in groups as well, because with employers, because that's what I use. I just use it because that's what one of the tactics that I learned, and so I try to use it and all around, see, because it's a go-to for me, and it's a skill that I'm practicing anyway, instead of you do this, you do that. So it's good. It's beneficial to the extent that you don't personalize or identify a person as a problem and always throw off that the situation or the problem is that other person by saying you lead with I, how it makes you feel, because ultimately the only problem that you having a problem because of your response to whatever was said or done. So you start off with, the problem is that I reacted to whatever you said in a negative manner. And so if that person is able to hear you, and that person has something vested in peace or establishing peace or maintaining peace with you or resolving the conflict, then, it depends on whether they can hear you or not to change something about what they're doing. Because the second part of that is once you tell a person how what they've done makes you feel, then you also, the next part of that is giving them a condition for a continued relationship, that you have to say, well, I feel this way when you do this. And so I would like for you not to do this, and so that we can continue being friends, so to speak. So that's kind of where I was going with that. So how, in what all situations, I guess that, so my question is how effective is that in all situations?
Yeah, so I was getting at like Apple iMessages, because that's what I thought you were saying. I guess it's one of the challenges of living in 2019. Yeah, so like iMessages versus you messages, like this made me feel this way. And I'm not trying to say that like you're a bad person, but what you said made me feel this way. Yeah, and I think that's super good in dealing with conflict, because some people may not have the level of self-awareness capable to work through the conflict, and they are just rather naive to the fact that they are hurting people with their words, or they are too aggressive or too assertive on whatever they may be. And so that's a very good way to bring things up almost as neutrally as you can, to say that, hey, this is how I feel. Like we're responsible for our own emotions, not other people's. And so here's what my emotions are feeling like based off of what you said. I'm like, let's talk about that. Is this what you meant? This is how I felt. I need you to know that like I felt this way in the past. kind of getting at that and creating a dialogue to then move forward with that conversation.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at. And so basically at the end of the day, what you're doing is trying to establish a dialogue so that you can explore what is actually happening with the interactions that you're engaged in. Seeking understanding and trying to convey, present an effect or something of that nature. And so at the end of the day, you are at the end of that interaction, either that person has to change something or you have to change something, or both of you have to change something.
I think that was part of the comment that I was going to make is I think it can be difficult when you use something like an iMessage, depending on who you're talking to, and being able to accept that maybe that person isn't going to change. So like you said, you can either change. Maybe I need to take a step back and evaluate the way that I reacted to the situation and look at things from your point of view, or depending on the context, maybe I need to change and, maybe we don't interact anymore, or, change the relationship that we have, something of that nature.
Exactly.
Yeah, the question I was going to ask is like, what if nobody wants to change? You just walk away, like, can you walk away? What if you can't? What do you do then?
Sometimes you can if you feel like you can that you don't want to walk away, you can compromise and say, well, if you'll do this and I'll do this, you can compromise, that way or whatever, try to work something out. And that'll give you a chance, you know what I'm saying? Just especially like in marriages and stuff like that, compromising will be, pretty good, I think. What y'all think?
Yeah, man, I've been married for just a little over a year, and I'm learning the importance of compromising and kind of battles and not being selfish, and learning how to really like understand what the other person is trying to say, what they want. Like I've thought for a long time, the selfishness is one of the biggest kind of problems with relationships in general. Not even just marriages, but dating relationships, friendships, peer relationships. Like selfishness just like is horrible and eats things away. But yeah, compromise is a way to like meet in the middle, and that helps us get outside of ourselves, empathize with what the other person is thinking. Yeah, I think compromise is super important.
Back to the question you asked, John, I think that at some point, if like nobody's willing to compromise, you do have to walk away. So maybe my question back to you is then like, do you have an example of a time where somebody like couldn't walk away when they like had to make a compromise? That way we could kind of work through an example. I don't know if you have one.
So if you have to make a compromise and you can't walk away, is that what you said? Yeah. When it relates to groups, like if you're in a mandated group and if you are forced, let's say you're in week 3 of a 12-week group and there's a conflict that came up and you're both mandated to be there for the next 9 weeks, what are you supposed to do? Do you just sit there the next 9 weeks and hate each other, never address each other? Do you make like little digs at each other? Just the group leader, what do they do in the situation? I think those are great questions. How to handle that, I don't know specifically. I think what I would do is try to talk to each individual separately outside of that group to hear where they're coming from, so I can get all the context I can as to maybe what they think was said, what was said, how they feel about what was said. I can try to piece together the puzzle and then work with them to see if they're willing to meet up together outside of the group. That's a best case scenario. It could be that neither of them ever want to do that, and they work through those 9 weeks and nothing ever gets resolved and they walk away, and that's where they left it. And there's this unresolved tension and conflict. I don't have any like set strategies I think I would go to other than trying to talk with them and see where they're coming from with everything. But that also assumes that if I'm interjecting, I can solve the problem, which, as therapists, we probably all think that to an extent. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have a clear-cut answer.
I think something we could do is utilize Seam's iMessages, and just kind of set the two people who are having conflict down and ask them to tell us how they're feeling, not what the other person did, but truly how they're feeling, and try to see if we can facilitate some sort of understanding of each person's feelings. Because at the end of the day, people have empathy, and even if it's a small amount of empathy, they have some empathy. So if two people are fighting and are arguing, I think that if we can show them that the other person is feeling some sort of emotion, that they might be able to feel that for them, and then maybe we could come to some sort of compromise and resolution.
I think that's an excellent strategy in the sense that as counselors, what we want to do also help people to take advantage of missed opportunities. And in that same vein, we want to help people be in the present, in the moment, and thereby avoid a missed opportunity, avoid creating a missed opportunity. So by inserting ourselves in the situation to that extent where we use the I message, the I statement, so that we can help facilitate an opportunity for people to make compromises and to also exercise acceptance, because we may not be able to come up with may not be able to get a satisfactory change to the extent that everyone's going to be happy. But part of growing and growth and progress is also about acceptance of that fact. Acceptance that this person is not going to see things my way, or doesn't see things my way, and I have to accept that and maybe change the way that I feel. It's kind of like the CBT type stuff. If you want to use cognitive behavior therapy techniques or whatever the case may be, in terms of what happened to make me feel this way, and then exploring why this action made me feel this way, and maybe there's something that I need to change about my thinking so that this doesn't bother me anymore if it's something that I can't change, because we can only change what we are doing and how we're responding. So either way, we can try to facilitate some.
Yeah, there's the, I don't know if you guys know the Serenity Prayer, but it's a famous one, and I think it starts off with, God, give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change. So yeah, going along in that same vein, maybe it does teach us that sometimes conflict resolution is unobtainable, and we have to live with that. Sometimes there's this tension that is going to go unresolved, and there are aspects of life that are going to be like that, and we have to learn how to accept unresolved tension. That makes sense. Yeah. And so that actually, it made me think of another point. The book kind of lists out, let's see, we've got psychoanalytic theory, Alderian, existential, person-centered, Gestalt therapy, CBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, solution-focused. Is there one that, well, first of all, is there one that you guys have found that you are gravitating toward, or one that you for sure know that you would use in counseling? And is there one that you think you've seen work well in group counseling?
Okay, go ahead. I'll wait.
So up in here, I'm in Washington, and a lot of the mental health clinics in my area mandate CBT. So there's not an option for a lot of the counselors. They have to use cognitive behavioral therapy. I know that one guy got approved for existential, but usually it's CBT up here.
And I like everything I do is CBT as well. I include CBT, but I kind of REBT is they're similar, quite similar, and basically the same concept with the triangles and stuff like that. But I like solution focused therapy in the sense that I always approach the situation and go into a situation or approach clients with the idea that they know themselves better than me, and they know also what the solution is, whether they're willing to engage in the action to bring about that solution or not. So I assume that they know what they need to do. It's not like I'm doing rocket science. Now, they may not understand the processes, or they may not have the, they may not know exactly how the metacognitive part of it or the executive functioning part of it, which is what we do. We model and we show people how to approach or how to think about things differently, but they certainly know they've had some success in something, and they understand what failure is. So I kind of like use both of those things to try to encourage them and to give them some power, some advocacy, because I start working on trying to get people to advocate for themselves right away. At the same time, I don't want to be the expert, so I try to make them the expert, that type of thing. So I kind of combine, we kind of pick up things and be eclectic in terms of what we use to address people, to approach the people.
So, Rochelle, do you notice, I don't know if you know this in your area, but do you think CBT is like one of the most widely used theories in that area around Washington?
I'm not sure why. I know that the Okanagan Behavioral Healthcare, they kind of rule the area, and the director has mandated CBT. One guy got approved for existential, but you can't pick yourself. But that's not with private groups and stuff like that. That's like if you're going through like the regular community health services, and but they do all the DVs, all the substance abuse. They're the ones that run all the debriefings and stuff like that. And so it's mandated in there. So I'm not sure if that's a Washington State thing or just over here, but I'm sure Seattle probably lets them play around a bit. But on the East Coast, it's mainly CBT everywhere that we go.
Okay. Taylor, what about you? Is there like one theory that you kind of found yourself leaning toward?
I definitely like CBT, and I think that there are a lot of situations where it's very helpful with a lot of my kids. I know that my kids who are in counseling, a lot of them, their counselors use CBT. I personally also really enjoy ACT therapy as well. And I think just in terms of kind of the conflict resolution, especially for my kids, understanding that sometimes you can't change what other people are going to do. So you can sit here and be angry with them all day, or you can sit here and accept that you can't control them and you can only control yourself, and kind of control the way that you behave. So those are two that I enjoy.
Roderick, what about you?
I'm sorry, I had to leave for a second. What was the topic?
Whoops. There's a bunch of theories that the book mentions that are good for group therapy. Like, cognitive behavior therapy is one, rational emotive therapy, existential therapy, Gestalt therapy. Let me see if I can pull them up. Is there just one that like you find yourself kind of gravitating toward? Alderian group therapy, person-centered approach. Those are the big ones. Solution-focused brief therapy.
Yeah, my facility, they use a lot of solution based therapies. Especially in group counseling, dealing with addicts and stuff like that. And so that's the one that I've been doing a lot of studying on, and I think that's one that I'm going to continue to practice and try to use and try to get better at it.
Solid. Yeah, I think I like CBT generally speaking. That's what I find myself like gravitating toward. I don't know for group therapy how well that would work. I don't have a lot of group therapy experience, but I think it would be tough because it's so process oriented to have a group be processing stuff like that all the time verbally. I know. I think that'd be a challenge. Like, I don't know which one would work best. I think solution focus would work real well because, generally speaking, it's a little faster moving, and I know groups don't meet for the length of time that a professional therapist will with an individual. Like you can meet once a week, once a month for years at a time, and I don't think many groups have that sort of timeline to them. So I think solution focused therapy would be a good one, but yeah, I haven't found myself like gravitating toward and be like, oh yeah, that's perfect for groups. Let's just use that.
Mm-hmm. I also use like that. That is definitely true. But you would only use like elements of it. I find that I can only use elements of it, and like I also use motivational interviewing, because you find that a lot of the you pull from what you need at the moment. So it's good to have a repertoire so that when a situation comes up, you might have to, like when you're dealing with certain clients, you have some resistance. You have to learn how to roll with. You have to determine whether that's resistance that you can roll with and use to your advantage. You have to use challenging. You have to, there's all types of things you can do. But like you said, you can't be direct CBT in a group like that because it is quite difficult, and it's more along the. And you got to have a high level of maturity and cognitive development to really engage CBT for it to be really effective. And it depends on what clientele you're dealing with and what population you're dealing with and everything. So you kind of got to have a tool bag for real.
Yeah, right. The more tools in your belt, the more equipped you're going to be to handle what comes your way. Haley, what were you going to say?
Oh, everybody else shared what they were liking about the different theories. So I figured, I want to ask, so I should probably go too. And I really liked cognitive behavioral therapy, but I mean, in a group setting, I think it's just, as we've been talking about, it's a lot, trying to figure out exactly like specific things in their life that they can change. But I think solution focus is also a really good one because, you can ask a group for what is like something that they want, like what's a goal of theirs of the group, like what is something that they want to work towards in this group, and then you can kind of tailor the conversations in your group around the different solutions that each person is wanting out of the group. And I think that obviously you shouldn't always just stick to one theory, but I think in a group setting, solution focused could be really beneficial for a lot of different people. But I mean, everybody's so different, and people's needs and people's wants and their behaviors in a group can kind of dictate the different theories that you might utilize. So that's where your whole tool belt comes in. Is like you really need to have all of them ready to use at any time. So yeah, that's what I got.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, everybody. So we've only got about 10 minutes left, and as we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't address tonight that you guys have questions about that you want to kind of expand on? Is there anything we didn't even get close to that you want to bring up? Is there any sort of residual thoughts that you guys have about tonight?
I wanted to kind of explore group stages. Like from what I understand now, we have the beginning, middle, and termination stage or ending stage. And I think is that everyone's understanding, or are there more? I'm sure there's more, but I'm just aware of beginning, middle, and ending stage. So I'll just start off with that if we got a couple minutes to discuss that a little.
Yeah, do you mean like as it relates to conflict, or just generally speaking the lifespan of a group? Hasim?
Say that again?
You mean just like as it relates?
Yes, the lifespan of a group.
Or just
it's like right now, I think we're definitely at the beginning stage, but we've also where you establish the rules and regulations and everything, but you're also getting a feel of how the group is actually going. You're getting a feel of the group leader's his competence, his knowledge and ability to facilitate the group as a member, and you are also gauging your peers and stuff. So I think all those things happen at the beginning stages, and I think we're there because I think a part of our assignment is going to be to identify. Of course, we're in the beginning stages, but just wanted to have a little discussion on that.
Okay.
I almost think that we are going to go through all of the stages of a group in each 2-hour session that we have. And my thought process behind it is because when we meet next week, there's going to be a new group leader. And our group rules are going to stay the same because we established those in the beginning, but we're going to have to change the way our conversations are because there's a new person that is facilitating everything. So I almost think that we've gone through the beginning, had the middle, and then we're going to terminate this group essentially at the end of these next 10 minutes and then restart next week. Does that make sense?
It really does. It really, really does.
So that's just my thought on it. Just because everything's going to change next week, you know? And the topic, it's going to be completely different. John, you're muted.
Yeah, and like my
Are you the optimist?
Yeah, like my personal way of things is I just present a bunch of information, then I go, oh, what do you guys think? Let's talk about it. That's just kind of the way I've always done things with groups. So like whoever's leading next week, I don't know who it is, going to be structured a little different. You know, they could do the same, they could do completely different. They could do something that's a mix between this and something else. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so are there any other like things we didn't talk about that you guys want to address before we close out?
I think it was funny that we got on the topic, but on accident of like social media and texting and conflicts. I see you laughing. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of issues surrounding social media and people using their phone and not actually talking. And I love circling back around. Go back to listening to people. If we were actually like listening to a person and hearing the words as they came out of their mouth, there's tone and inflection that changes the way that things are perceived. And so I think that, you know, social media as a whole has changed conflict and conflict resolution between people. And I think it's almost kind of nixed conflict resolution and it's just created conflict, which in turn for us as group, if we're, you know, leading a group, that could become a huge issue because there may be things happening outside of the group with our group members that we don't know about and that we aren't seeing. So I wonder how we can combat against that. I think that, I don't know, any ideas of how to combat against the dreaded social media?
Man, that's tough. Might as well just like make a teaching series out of something like that. Yeah, I've noticed that. I have noticed how bad Twitter can be at that. And one of the things I've noticed is that Facebook is similar to Twitter in that it is a rant. And Twitter is even becoming this thing where, you know, it's no longer like this however many characters, but it's, oh, here's a thread. I'm going to post 6 tweets at once of this rant that I have. Or it's so easy to dig on somebody and just create more conflict. Like there's so much of that the idea of an internet troll was even, you know, birthed years ago, that's all some person focuses on is just creating conflict. And then how do they beget more conflict? I don't know, as it relates to group therapy, I think one of the challenges a group leader can pose to the group members is like stay off of social media during this group and see how that changes and influences conflict for you, generally speaking. Yeah, I think that would be a good kind of action step and suggestion from a leader to the members. But, you know, obviously we can't control them, so it would just be a suggestion. And then, yeah, I don't know, because it's so pervasive and almost addicting because the interaction between social media and us and our brains and like the little hit of dopamine every time you receive a notification for something, it's tough. So I have no idea what we could do. Hasim, I think you're muted, man.
You're still muted.
All right, how about now? I agree with you. It's very this social media thing is wrought with problems, and it creates more situations or problems or conflict than it resolves. And the main reason is because if we have difficulty even listening to each other and engaging active listening in person, imagine how little those skills are in effect when we're having to read and we're not there. So all the miscues and miscommunications with texting and all that. So best we can hope for is to encourage or recommend actually that for the duration of the groups that social media is avoided or refrained from, and let's go for it that way. But in terms of having group on social media, I couldn't fathom it.
I think another thing that we could recommend to our group members is that they just don't follow each other, because hopefully you have some sort of anonymity within your group, and if things are going to be positive, it might be best if they're not interacting on social media, just because there is so many issues that come around it.
Yeah, and those of us that have worked with high schoolers, I think we've seen the detriment of social media, how it can play. Like, maybe two people in high school have conflict, and then social media is just like kerosene to the fire that is their conflict, and then it gets other people involved, which just makes more conflict. Yeah, at least for the duration of a group, asking them not to interact with each other on social media, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, and the one thing I was going to say is, if I remember right, there's a stat from college that I learned where something like 65 to 93% of communication is nonverbal, depending on what you're doing. So regardless of how much the majority of communication is nonverbal, and so we think that something on social media is going to convey what we want, but like you said, you don't hear tone, you don't hear volume, you don't hear speed. You can't ever tell if somebody's really sarcastic or not. Yeah, it's just too tough. And so I think when it comes to social media and conflict in groups, if there's somewhere where we could just like separate them completely from one another, it would help so much. All right. Any last thoughts before we close? We got about a minute left. Anything? No.
I think we should definitely hammer down what time we meet next week.
Yeah, that is a great idea.
Now.
So I work until 4 Pacific Standard Time, Monday through Friday. So the soonest I could be in front of a computer is 4:15. But 4:30 works a lot better. But I know, people have different time frames. Haley, you work till 5 every day?
Technically, I work until 6 Pacific Standard Time, but I can take my lunch at 5 and just like be on lunch at 5. So I can be like 5 Pacific Standard Time.
So would 5 be what works best for you?
Yeah, because like starting today at 4:30, I was like still emailing people and responding to students and stuff, and that's not probably the best. So yeah, 5 would be better for me.
I don't have a problem with an hour later.
Okay. Michelle, Taylor, Roderick, 5 Pacific Standard Time work for you guys?
Every what day? On every Wednesday?
Every Wednesday.
I think yeah, every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time would be the standard meeting time.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, Michelle, does that work for you? I know your hours are a bit different than the rest of ours. I think
You're on mute, Rochelle.
Rochelle, I think you're muted. Hey, Rochelle.
Are we all in agreement?
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. So I only have every other Wednesday off.
Okay.
So I have this next Wednesday off, but the following Wednesday I'll be working till 6 p.m. I mean, I can see if I can get off early and have somebody come in, but I have to have somebody come in and replace me. I can't just leave.
So is there a day besides Wednesday that would work at 5 p.m.?
I work 2 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on, and it rotates like that. So my days change every single week.
Okay.
Into that 60-40. So I mean, I'll just do the one. Next Wednesday is fine, and then I'll try to work on getting off an hour early the following Wednesday and having somebody come in.
Okay, so then we can leave it next Wednesday at 5 p.m. And then we'll set tentatively the following Wednesday, which I think would be the 11th, October 11th. And then Rochelle,
Okay.
if something changes, let us know, and then we can hopefully, as a group, be flexible.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks, guys. We did it. First one down.
Whoever is for next week, I don't think that they're going to update the group forum in each of our weekly assignments. So just
we have to go back.
Yeah, so I would just like check, or whoever's doing next week, just post the Zoom link in the week 1 assignment.
Yes. Very good. I was going to make that observation as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody got that? We have to go back to week 1 forum to communicate with each other and everything related to the group. You go back to week 1 group forum to communicate.
Yeah, and I mean, if we feel comfortable enough, we can also give out cell phone numbers if we got that, or like email chain, because that might.
And emails, yes.
Yeah, it might be easier. We can put
So
it.
I'll do that.
Or if not, we can just use the group form. Whichever.
Okay. All right. Very good.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, guys. Until next week.
Bye.
See y'all later.
Bye.